sir?
Go ahead.
All right. Hi, my name is Rashad Reedus, and today's date is March 22nd, 2015. I'm here with Mr. Michael Chisley on the Ball State campus as a part of the Ball State University African American Alumni Oral History Project. I'm going to start first by, sir, asking you when and where were you born?
I was born in Indianapolis in October 26, 1951.
Cold War. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
guess you
approaching
could
that
say
area.
Yeah.
All right,
I didn't have nothing to do with it.
So what was the environment like for African Americans then, early on in your childhood?
Well, as a child, I did not know a whole lot of differences because the neighborhood I lived in till I was 9 was a predominantly African American neighborhood. Middle class people, hard-working people. My father was a police officer, and at that time my mother was a school teacher. I had an older brother that was 3.5 years older than me. Back then, everybody lived in that same neighborhood. The doctor that I went to lived right across the street from us. A little corner grocery store, literally on the corner. If I had gone to public school, the public school was literally right a block down the street from where I lived at. I went to a Catholic school, and the Catholic school still was probably about maybe a half a mile away from where we lived. Weren't any school buses. Everybody pretty much walked to school. Everything was within the neighborhood. There was a feeling of safety, but still parents raised us to be aware. Certain things, we didn't talk to strangers. I still don't do that to this day. It's just the environment was you knew everybody in the neighborhood, and if somebody was in the neighborhood that you didn't really recognize, you sort of shunned away from them because, what is this person here for? Even if your neighbors had, family visits and stuff, you pretty much knew who your family visits, who your neighbor's family was and stuff like that. We lived in a double off 30th Street. Our address was 924 West 30th Street. I remember that because my parents, if we got lost, we could always tell the police where we lived at. And my phone number was 1-855-820. Now, I'm 63 years old, and I still remember that phone number because that was drilled into us, So you knew where you lived, and you knew the phone number if you ever got lost or separated from your parents. The Catholic school I went to was Holy Angels. It was, to give you some background, the neighborhood had pretty much probably in the last 4 or 5 years when my parents moved there, had been a white neighborhood. But by the time, as I grew up, it was a predominantly black neighborhood. There were some white families still, in the neighborhood, but for the most part, I'd say probably 98% of the families in the neighborhood were African American. The school I went to, Holy Angels, it was a black Catholic school. It had been a white school at one point, and matter of fact, I know one of the first students who went to Holy Angels, the integrated Holy Angels, and he's probably about 10 years older than me. So somewhere in that 10 years, the church, the neighborhood probably started to change. Had a relatively comfortable, could ride our bikes up and down the sidewalk and stuff. You hear people from time to time talk about, regardless where they lived at, if they lived in the city, is when the street lights came on, you had to be on the porch. We had to be on the porch at least by the sidewalk. And I still, when people say that, it makes sense. Oh yeah, I forgot about that, But we had to be on the sidewalk. But everything was a pleasant as far as a kid, because even though there might have been some racial issues or something like, our parents pretty much had protected us from that. For example, my mother was a storyteller because of her teaching background. Thus, I've inherited that gift. I tell stories a lot. But they came up during the era of desegregation. She went to, her and my dad went to Christmas Attucks because that was the only school they were allowed to go to. But people will sit up and say, oh, how bad that was, stuff like that. The majority of the students, I won't say the majority, but a lot of the teachers at Attucks had doctorate degrees. So, because they couldn't work in universities. So, my mother were a lot of the white students that she went to college with at the University of Illinois, who were maybe taking Latin as advanced classes to prepare them. My mother took Greek because she had a professor who had a PhD in Greek. So people who taught science, they had doctorate degrees. The people who taught history had doctorate degrees. Even though I came up in a post-segregated era, and I went to a private boys' school, I didn't have any professors or teachers that had doctorate degrees or anything like that. So you had to put everything in perspective, and so that's what life has sort of taught me, is that my reality is not someone else's reality, even though we might be in the same era, might have been in the same neighborhood or something like that. My reality is probably different than the next person's reality. Doesn't mean one reality is worse than the other, it's just different. Okay. When I left Holy Angel, my parents moved. We moved out in the suburbs, you're familiar with Ben Davis. Well, I grew up in Pike Township. Okay. And Ben Davis at the time was probably in the same boat. They had like little clusters of black families. Wasn't very many black families that went to Ben Davis. There wasn't very many black families that went to Pike. I think maybe Pike might have had maybe 800 students in it, and probably maybe 50 of them were black. Okay, a lot different today. But I didn't go to Pike. I went to another Catholic school, which was right down, it wasn't down the road, it was away from where I lived in Pike Town, called St. Monica's. And from 5th grade to 8th grade, I went to St. Monica's. And then after I left St. Monica's, I went to high school, Cathedral High School, for 4 years. And after I left Cathedral, came here to Ball State.
Okay, sir. All right, I want to back it up just a little bit. When you were describing your community, it sounded like, it was very close, everything was proximal and everything. Would you agree with the statement that, it takes a village to raise a child? Were you raised by your community, would you say?
Well, keep in mind I lived in 2 communities. The first community I lived on 924 West 30th Street, okay? And it was a larger community as compared to when we moved out in Pike Township. Pike Township, we still were within a black community. I got a story to tell about that, but it wasn't as the demographics wasn't as large. I lived in my earlier years, till I was 9 years old, I lived in the city. We moved out the suburbs, we were isolated, and even though there were families around, there weren't wasn't that many of us around. Okay, we were a little pocket. Matter of fact, that little pocket's still there today. Even though the older people were dying off and pretty much gone. But if there was a senseness of community, I probably gathered it when I lived out in Pike Township because we were a smaller community. And literally, we knew everybody in that community. When I lived on 30th Street and we lived in the double that I talked about, my grandparents lived in the other house in the other side of the double. So I knew my mom and dad and my grandparents, but that was it. When we moved out in the suburb, my grandmother was up the street. I had cousins who lived next door to my grandparents. Okay, so my next door neighbors had cousins that lived in the neighborhood. We were in an era where people who were upwardly mobility, especially black folks, were buying lots of land, moving out into the suburbs, like like the American dream, building their houses and raising their family. But probably like I'm going to say at the time till I graduated from high school, there was probably maybe 50 homes in the neighborhood. So we knew everybody. On 30th Street, we knew of people, but we really didn't know them.
Okay. All right, sir. And how many siblings did you have?
Well, I have two siblings, but my brothers passed away, but I have a sister that came along 19 years after I did. So I was a sophomore in college when my younger sister was born.
Could you give me their names, please?
My oldest brother, my only brother, his name was Terrence, and my sister's name is Nicole.
Okay.
Same last name.
What was your brother's relation to you in age? Were you guys close in age? Or?
Well, he was 3.5 years older than me. So he was and my brother was, dare I say, brilliant. So I was always in his shadow. He was just a smart guy, He was the first black student at Brebeuf High School. When he walked in the door, Brebeuf started 9th grade and they added a grade each year, all the way up to his senior year. He was the only black student in his class. There were other black students that came after him to the school, but in his class, he was the only black student to his senior year. And another gentleman that I know very well, named Roger Lyons, came his senior year. But in 1966, there were only 2 black students that graduated in the first graduating class at Brebeuf. My brother was extremely intelligent, different, but extremely intelligent. I remember when we talk about racial issues, I remember when he was a junior, he was going to go to his junior prom, and they were going to have it at a prestigious country club in Indianapolis. And all the preparations, everything was put in until they found out that he was coming. And then that prestigious country club said, well, you can have your prom here, but he can't come. And one of the outstanding things that Brebeuf did at that time, they said, if he doesn't come, then none of us come. They could have easily had done and said, well, Terry, can you, we're sorry, but they didn't do that. If he doesn't come, no one comes. And so they had their prom in another place. That's probably one of the few times growing up that I ever came in contact with racial discrimination. There were some other things that happened, but as I look back, and as I saw them at the time, I knew they were racial, but because my parents were the type of parents, you don't fight that battle, we'll fight it, okay? So I just went on along with my merry business, because it was one thing that my parents, and I think not just my parents, a lot of our parents did at that time, is that they removed that responsibility from us. They took them on, and as we came along, probably in the late 60s, mid 60s and 70s, we started to look at things more, passionately, because of the Black Revolution, if you want to call it that, was going on, stuff like that.
You mentioned the Black Revolution. Are you referring to the Black Panther movement?
No, okay. That's just a small part of it. Mm-hmm. I would probably go back and say you'd have to look at the Harlem Renaissance, okay, that my parents and that generation grew up around and stuff like that. That was a revolution, okay. Black art, black education, self-discovery. When we were coming along, the Black Panther Party, they were the Black Panther Party. They did some very good things in Oakland, but they were portrayed in a negative light. Not very many people, black people, were involved with that. they knew of it, they might identified with it, but they weren't part of it. Okay, we became what we would say probably in the 60s and 70s. We called ourselves, we weren't revoluting anything. Okay, we was running our mouths and sputing things, but we weren't, we weren't involved in any. We were probably more rhetoric. There were some actions taken, like as far as there was some civil disobedience and things like that, but nothing that I would consider, revolutionary. There were some riots and things like that, but those were those riots and things that happened. They were in direct cause of something else that happened within those communities. This was not something that was widespread. If anything that was going with revolutionaries, because we were coming into a self-identity of, the word Negro and colored was starting to vanish. We were no longer Negroes, we were no longer colored, we identified with the word black. And that's when I hear these, this younger generation talking about, well, we're not black, we're not African American. They don't know how those things came about. Those things just didn't just come out of the clear blue sky one day and say, oh, we're going to call ourselves black. We called ourselves black because black had a negative connotation, and we was fighting that negative connotation instead of being colored, which was a nice word, or being Negro. No, we were black, okay? And when we was putting this in people's faces, we're black, we ain't colored, we ain't Negroes, we are black people, we come from the motherland, we come from Africa, deal with it, okay? That was the revolution of self-identity, self-identification, and being aware of who you were and what you were about. And then at the same time was that it was a strong movement, a push of African American black people, to get educated. I think you'll see, and during that time, universities were having large enrollments of black students. Now, it wasn't that the universities just opened up the doors. And when I say university, I'm talking about white universities. It wasn't like they just opened up, oh, come on, y'all, we're happy that y'all here. No, it was a struggle to get into those universities and stuff like that. My wife went to Anderson College, okay? And we were talking about that the other day, is that there was things going on prior to her going to Anderson College that the black students there were dealing with, just like the black students here at Ball State were dealing, that I didn't deal with, okay? Because those issues had been somewhat resolved and stuff like that. My wife and her group of students, they were probably the largest number of blacks that came to Anderson College at the time, just like my group was probably the largest group of black students that came to Ball State at that time, okay? So a lot of things had happened prior to us getting to our prospective universities. Well, Anderson College was a college at that time. But my wife's from Mississippi. She didn't know nothing about Anderson College. She saw it in a program, and she decided, oh, that looks like a nice place I want to go to. So she applied, and she got accepted. Come to find out years later, she got accepted because they were trying to get more black students at Anderson College, okay?
Okay. So it was more of a, I wouldn't say affirmative action, maybe.
Well, affirmative action was part of what was going on at the time. That's that's why black students were being accepted at because at the time majority of black students went to historically black universities. Okay, they were the largest universities that graduated black students. It was a handful that probably, like my mother, she went to University of Illinois in 1940s, all right? There's just a handful of black students, and they probably came from Chicago. My mother came from Indiana, but the point I'm trying to make, affirmative action was probably a large part why such a migration of black students entered white universities at the time.
So, sir, was education stressed in your family?
Oh, yeah. It was never a point in my life that I didn't think I was going to go to college. Even though there were some people that probably tried to dissuade me from even thinking about going to college because of my especially my mom. That was never a thought. Her children were going to go to college.
And also, was your family, would you say religious, very religious?
They went to church. I would say they were extremely religious. I look at, my parents were religious, that we were Catholic. They believed in God. They believed in the tenets and principles of Catholicism. But were they going to church and doing the rosary every day or something like that? No. Now, my wife's side, they're a lot more religious than my family was. But I think you had to look at the era and the part of the country that they were at, and why those things were important. But I mean, we observed the holidays, the holy days and stuff like that. But as far as saying, like, my dad probably, when he talked about, he probably could quote scriptures better than my mom. She knew scriptures, but she wasn't quoting them. My father could, not in great detail, but and it's probably because of his background. My parents were converts, to Catholicism. Me and my brother and my sister, we were raised Catholic.
So you mentioned that your wife's family was more religious. Can you tell us your wife's name?
My wife's name is Denise. Her maiden name is Azur, Hazeur. My wife is from the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. You probably heard of Gulfport, Biloxi, Mississippi. Oh, come on now. You heard New Orleans. Okay, Gulfport and Biloxi are Gulfport's probably about 50 miles from New Orleans, right along the Gulf Coast. You cannot go any further south than where my wife's from unless you're going to walk out in the Gulf of Mexico. There have been 2 major hurricanes in the United States, Category 6s, and both of them hit her hometown base, St. Louis, Mississippi.
Wow.
Okay, right on the Gulf of Mexico.
All right, sir. So, curious question. What was your dream occupation as a child?
My dream occupation as a child was to be a professional football player.
Did you play on the local football team?
Played in grade school, high school. Was supposed to come here to Ball State and play here. But by the time I got here, I was a revolutionary. Wasn't taking anything from the man. And I didn't know if, at the time, and I think that probably kept me from getting scholarship. I'd got some scholarship offers, but I think that kept me from getting other scholarship offers because I think my coaches and stuff like that, well, he's somewhat radical and stuff like that. And that was one of the things that were going on in the country at that time. I remember an incident at Indiana University where the black football players walked off the team because they felt there was some racial biases and injustice. And so blacks across the country, a lot of them were losing scholarships. I know some brothers down here that lost scholarships because of their radicalism and stuff like that. Now, what they were talking about would be considered mundane, but that particular time, you sound like a Black Panther. We can't have you on the team sound like a Black Panther and stuff like that. But those things happen, here and other colleges and stuff like that. I had one fraternity brother that played basketball here at Ball State, and he had an internal conflict going on with the basketball coach at the time. And when he graduated, he found out through another player that the Chicago Bulls had interest in him and wanted him to try out. They weren't going to draft him, but they wanted him to try. He didn't know about because the coach hid it from him. Now, did I see the actual letter? No, I didn't. But I know the guy. I know his reputation. He's not one to just come up and say, oh, Chicago Bulls want me to come play for them. He was told by one of the white players on the team that he saw the letter on the coach's desk. So those were some things when I said, when you ask me, like, okay, what are racial tensions going on? No, No, because we were probably more concerned about what was going on in Vietnam and the world and stuff like that. The racial stuff, we were pretty much focused and concentrating on, especially by the time you become a junior. I'm trying to get out of this place, all right? You guys can go ahead and ride and pick it and do whatever you're going to, but I'm trying to get out of here, all right? So those things probably prior to me, now you talk to some people who were here before me, they'll probably give you a different story. But those are battles that they had to fight, okay? We came in, my group in 1969 came in on the other end of that. So a lot of those things, there was a couple of incidents that happened on campus. Like I said, there was this one brother, he was trying to do a student teaching in Yorktown, but Yorktown didn't want anybody of color there. And so they were fighting back and forth with the university. So we had a big meeting in the ballroom. You know, wasn't nothing we could do. We couldn't make Yorktown take him. But that was a university issue. Excuse me. But those was like, you know, things happened. They were like isolated incidents here. For the most part, you know, black students as well as the white ones, you know, that was, you know, era of love and happiness, and everybody was hippies and stuff like that. You know, as far as racial tension and stuff like that, wasn't really a lot of that going on.
Okay. What would you say was your motivation to choose Ball State instead of other universities?
You want the long story or the short story?
Either one.
All right. When I was 10 years old, I was watching a Chicago Bears football game. And at halftime, the Ball State University marching band performed at Chicago. I think it was Soldiers Field at the time. And I saw the band, and I decided then, at 10 years old, I wanted to go to Ball State. That's the honest to God's truth.
Okay. And you maintained that throughout high school? Just dead set on?
Well, I wasn't dead set on it, but as time went by, I just, I would go to, like, if Ball State had some kind of introductory program for high school students, I would go to their events. I knew some people who lived in Muncie and stuff like that. I just knew that, you know, by the time I was a senior in high school and the choices came up to what colleges I wanted to go to, I decided, I said, well, I didn't want to go where everybody else went to, because I knew if I went with everybody else, I'd get in trouble and I'd probably never graduate. So I knew I needed to go someplace where I didn't know anybody, and Ball State sort of fit at that. Well, it just works right in, okay?
All right, and what was your first impression when you came to campus?
I was a scared freshman, 17-year-old freshman. Didn't know anybody, and that was the downside of it. Didn't know anybody, and I was scared, and I was away from home. I mean, literally away from home for the first time. The university wasn't so large like IU. See, I had a brother, my brother Terrence, he went to University of Illinois. My mother went to University of Illinois. Those were huge campuses, okay? I had visited other campuses, and I knew if I went to a large university, I was scared that I was going to get swallowed up, and I wouldn't be, I would have no identity. Who would know Michael Chisley? When I got here, the campus wasn't so big that, you know, I felt, you know, swallowed up by it. But it, you know, it was a good sized university. Didn't know anybody. Went to orientation, and they said, look at the person on the left of you and look at the person on the right of you. You know, two of you won't be here after the first year. That's how they used to do orientation. Everybody in the country did it like that. Look at the person on the left, look at the person on the right, two of you won't be here. I was like, oh, well, hell, what the hell am I doing here for, you know, if I ain't gonna be here? So I was fortunate that when I got down here and I met some people, made friends and stuff like that, and start realizing what my purpose was here in college, and getting hooked up with people with like type interests and having those long conversations in the dorm at 2 or 3 o'clock, and found that, hey, I was just like everybody else. We were all down here. We were all scared. We all wanted to make it. We didn't know if we were going to make it or not, but we sort of pooled together and reinforced to each other that we belong here. We were going to make it, and if somebody was starting to fall by the wayside, that we were going to pull them all, get our resource, and we were going to pull them in, and we were going to drag each other across the finish line.
Okay.
That was the revolution.
So, at your orientation, was it an integrated orientation?
Yeah. Sitting white folks, black folks. It was, they didn't bring the black kids in and say, we're going to have a separate orientation for y'all, However, one of the things we try to do on the Black Alumni Council is that we did want to get with black students. And most of us, I think, will agree is that at some point in our tenure here at the university, someone pulled us under their wing and mentored us. So as adults, we felt that was important, that we connect with the black students on campus and give them reinsurance and reinforcement that they can make it at the university. That didn't happen for us. We were just thrown into the mix. I sit back and I look at, like, when I first signed up from classes down here, which is entirely different than the way you do now. When I met with my guidance counselor, it took all maybe 15, 20 minutes. And she said, okay, what do you want to major in? These are the classes. And if you want to graduate in 4 years, these are how many classes you need to take. Okay, what classes you want to take? Hell, I'm 17 years old. I don't know jack, okay? And I understand that she probably had 1,000 people that she had to go through, okay? I understand that now. But I'm sitting there like, hey, I was left to my own devices. I was fortunate that I had a mother who had went to college, okay, and graduated from college. But when I look back at some of the brothers and sisters, I even say some of the white students who didn't have the availability of somebody to sort of help them through that path. It's not that kids were stupid while they flunked out of school. They just didn't have any direction and no one who saw point them and tell them, mentor them on what directions they needed to do.
And that kind of leads into the next question, sir. What was the black student community like when you arrived on campus? And then how was it when you graduated?
In those 4 years, pretty much the same. Not a whole lot changed. We pretty much associated, did everything amongst ourselves. We went to classes with other students and stuff like that, but for the most part, like on the weekends, anybody is down during my era, what are you going to do on the weekend? Everybody would say, we had a name for it, but I won't mention the name. But those students down there, they know what we called the room. It was 301, 302 over in the student center. Every Friday, Saturday night, we had a dance over there. Okay, and so the question was like, all right, it's the weekend. What are you gonna do? Well, I'm gonna do the same thing you want to be on 301, 302. And then we might go to a party out in the city or someplace like that. But for the most part, Fridays, Saturdays, every now and then, unless one of the fraternities or the sororities were having something in what they call the Sabine room, we'd have parties over there. So, but for the most part, we partied with each other. We hung out with each other. The old library, which is across the street, it used to be the old library. There was a big room there called a reading room. We took over the reading room. It was no longer, that's where I don't know how it is in the new library. It's where you go down, sit, and you study and stuff like that. It's real quiet, stuff like that. Well, when we took it over, then it wasn't like that anymore. And it really, it sort of like everybody on campus sort of like, this was like a gathering place. And I remember one specific incident. We were hanging out in the reading room, acting silly before classes and stuff like that. And it must have been a graduate student there that summer, and he didn't know that the reading room wasn't a reading room. And so and it wasn't just us, because everybody came through there, and it was just like, okay, a hangout place. And he was trying to study and stuff like that, and he got irritated with all the noise, and he real loud and echoed through the room. People started calling him everything but a child of God while he was in there. It wasn't just us, the white kids, everybody like, well, who are you? It's obvious you don't know the culture, okay? So, I guess it embarrassed him so bad, he got back and got up and left and went up in the stacks, I guess. But that was sort of like one of the changes that happened down here. We had our places. People wanting to identify with some place. My friends from Gary, there are places that they would hang out in Gary. They had names for them, and some of them would call it like 25, 25th Street. And so what we would do on campus, we would say, well, we wanted to meet someplace, where are you going to meet at? Well, we say we're going to meet at 25. Well, 25 meant we were going to meet at the library, all right? It was our need to stay connected to where we came from, even though we were at the university. So we identified, people from Indianapolis might have another terminology for where they wanted to meet at, but for the most part, we did things on campus to keep us connected, even though we were at the university. And I think most of us felt privileged to be able to get a college education, that we still needed to identify from where we came from.
You mentioned the reading room with the graduate student telling all of you to shh, and then you mentioned how it was like a unified response by students of all colors. Would you say at times like that, you guys, instead of identifying by like groups, you identified as Ball State students together?
Oh, I guess you could probably put it that way, because like I said, is that everybody came through there, okay? It was sort of like a shortcut, because that was like the focal point on campus. So it was like when you came through there, you knew that you was going to probably run in, and I think the white students felt the same way. I'm going to probably run into somebody, that I know cutting through the library, okay? Unless it was during the summer or spring where it was warm and stuff like that. But for the most part, and it was probably one of the few air-conditioned places on campus too. So, let's just go here and chill.
How many students would you say were from the local area, Muncie area?
I would probably say at that time, when I say the local area, I'm probably talking about maybe a 20-mile radius. And I would probably say probably at least half, because you had, people, I knew some of the guys, had a guy in the dorm, he was from Winchester, Indiana. I don't think Winchester's very far from here, Newcastle. Had a lot of kids from there, but, the large cities like Indianapolis and Fort Wayne, and we didn't have very many kids from Evansville. But I would say probably half or more probably came within prior 20-mile radius of the university.
So
no one ever told me specifically.
So what was your major at Ball State?
Physical education.
And you mentioned earlier that when you guys would, it was the weekend on Friday, you would go to a party in 301, 302, or a frat party. Were you in a fraternity?
Mm-hmm. There's only one.
Was it a historically black fraternity?
There's only one. You didn't follow up on that.
Okay. And what fraternity is that, sir?
Mega Psi Phi.
And I see you are still a proud member.
Yes, I am. I forgot my pen. The rest are boys' clubs.
And how did you?
That was a joke.
Oh, yeah. How did your fraternity compare to other fraternities, Greek fraternities?
Story behind that too. There were pretty much two fraternities on campus, and that was the Kappas and the Omegas. There was a small group of blacks on campus that were alphas, but not very many. But for the most part, it was the Kappas and the Qs, and the Kappas by far were the largest group on campus. There was a lot of strife between the Kappas and the Qs. So the thing about it is that how could we have so many racial issues go on campus when we couldn't even deal with each other on campus. The Kappas had been on campus for the largest. A lot of the university faculty, staff, I won't say a lot because it wasn't many, it's probably 2 or 3, were Kappas. They were founding members of Kappa. The university, when Omega was trying to get established on campus prior to me getting here, told them, so why y'all need to start a new fraternity? You already have one. Why can't you just all join that one? Not understanding that everybody's story is not the same. There were 2 guys that helped get the organization started here. I knew them from Indianapolis. They were older. The Payne brothers. There were some other people and stuff like that, as far as Omega was concerned. But I wanted to join Omega because my brother who was an Omega who in University of Illinois. So when I came to Ball State, wasn't any other thought for me. I was going to be a Q, okay, as we go by. So, but the chapter, we didn't have a chapter. It wasn't very, the brothers on campus wasn't very many of us. When I got made into the fraternity, we probably had the largest pledge class that Mega's ever had. A lot of those brothers didn't make it. They didn't, not because they didn't make the fraternity, they just weren't in school anymore. So the five members of my pledge class, along with the brothers that were down here, finally got a national charter for Omega. I'm one of the charter members of the Omega Upsilon Beta chapter here at Ball State. We finally organized, and then our group started getting larger and larger, where we were actually able to physically, I don't want to say physically, we could compete with the Kappas on memberships. If the Kappas, like for example, prior to me getting here, that the Kappas decided that and this happened on a couple occasions, the Omegas were going to have a big dance. And if the Kappas decided that they weren't going, they were going to boycott our dance, that meant they didn't go. The Kappa women didn't go. The guys on campus, they ain't going to go to a dance where ain't no women, okay? So our organization, if we had a party or a major party or something like that, and the Kappas decided that they weren't going to, it was going to cost us, okay? So there was a lot of conflict between the Kappas and the Qs. Now, by the time I got made, the bridges started to connect, because that's the other part of the revolution. We all realized that we were all here for the same reason. We didn't have time to be arguing back and forth over little petty differences and stuff like that, okay? My roommate was a Kappa. To this day, he's probably one of the closest people I have as a friend, okay? We communicate all the time. But not just because of me and him, I think what was going on in the black sororities had the same issues going on too. But we finally realized, came to a point that, we're all black students. We're all trying to make it. We're all trying to make our mark on life, okay? So we don't need to be bickering over these other things, okay? There's a whole bunch of injustices going on in Muncie, Indiana, period, that we're going to have to come together. And those things started happening as during my time down here. I'd say probably my last 3 years down here.
So would you say that rift between you all began to close as you all were closer and closer to graduating?
No, it started happening before then. It started happening before. Like I said, my roommate, when he was pledging Kappa, I was pledging Q. Okay, we like to jokingly say that we helped each other get made. Okay, because he probably knows enough about Omegas. I don't know much about Kappa. Okay. And cause we were both online, and the big brothers was hazing us and messing with us and stuff like that. So, but that was probably going on all over campus. Is that yeah, you're a Kappa. That's cool, because the principles and tenets of Kappa Alpha Psi, those are things that you believe in, and we're proud that you're a proud Kappa. Those are principles that you believe in, being a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity. We're happy for you, proud for you. Cool, because when y'all have a big party, then we all party, okay? When the Kappas have a big party, we all gonna party, okay? When we get, it was incident, if there was some racial tension, it's usually amongst the men on the university, especially in sporting events, when guys are trying to show their bravado. I remember a couple when we had incidents, like when we be playing intramural football or something like that, we might get into a big confrontation with a white fraternity, or we was playing basketball, somebody might have a confrontation with a white fraternity, stuff like that. But what would happen is that, he said, oh, the Kappas, they had a problem with, I won't mention any of the other fraternities, with XYZ fraternity. Well, the next game, if we were playing that same fraternity, Kappas, Alphas, Independents, all of them showed up at the game, all right? So if we're going to get it on, we're going to get it on, okay? Because the Omegas, we only had maybe about 20 members. We weren't going to fight another organization that had 300 members. Ain't no way we could going to do that. Collectively, if it was going to go down, we could do it collectively. And so, and that didn't happen often, okay? It was, a lot of us just young men trying to show who they were.
Okay, in terms of, I guess, hanging out, partying on the weekends, did you guys ever include any white members? Or did they ever join, or did you guys ever go?
If they wanted to come, they come, It's just like years ago, I was speaking to a group of students. I was getting my administrative license, and one of the guys that was in my class invited me to come talk to his class, his economics class out in Center Grove. All white community and stuff like that. Probably they saw a black person was on TV, or maybe they saw him in the Greenwood Mall. Probably not, because we didn't go to Greenwood Mall and shop. But they had their contacts with African Americans were limited, let's say. So he had me speaking to his class, and they were talking about, you guys get mad at us, but you have your segregated programs and stuff like that. And I said, well, like, well, you have, Black Expo, and you have Indiana Black Expo pageant and stuff like that, and we can't belong to that. And my question was, why can't you? You choose not to be involved in that because you don't identify with that. There's nothing that says white folks can't be involved in this. I don't know if they still do it here, but I know they do across the country. Fraternities and sororities have what they call step downs, or march, step marches, things like that, where members of the fraternities and sororities will do line dances and things like that and that nature to keep it simple. I was on the Panhellenic Council. I was representing my fraternity. So when I went to Panhellenic Council, I would invite the members of Panhellenic Council to come see our step shows. Sometimes some of them showed up, out of curiosity. They just wanted to know what it was about. We were so proud of it. So, but it wasn't like, if you didn't have the official black stamp, you couldn't come to our events.
Okay. Your first year at the university was 1969, right, sir?
Yes.
Okay. I read that in 1969 that there was like a shortfall in legislative appropriations, so tuition was raised significantly higher. Did that affect you?
Didn't affect me, but the story behind that. The spring prior to me coming here, it affected that, how much it raised, because, I just knew I was going to go to college, and I knew my parents were going to pay for me to go to college, okay? The universities, IU, Purdue, Ball State, I'm sure Indiana State, they had a mass rally in Indianapolis protesting the rate increase. And it was like a demonstration, and it went, I remember it going down Pennsylvania. I think it must have went around the state capitol and stuff like that. And it was huge. It was, I'd say there was probably several thousand people, university students that participated. But see, that was the age of enlightenment, and people were, protesting the war and stuff like that. Indiana students weren't pretty much into protesting the war, but there were some. But that increase, that brought everybody together. And I remember being downtown because the school I went to was downtown. Cathedral was located on 14th and Meridian, so I was already downtown. And being downtown, I remember watching the students with their signs marching up and down Meridian Street and stuff like that. And I remember a group of black students just came out of nowhere. I don't know if they were from IU, I don't know where, but they were black students. And they took over the lead of the parade because they had dashikis on and they were dressed in our African garb, because that was the other thing of our self-awareness, is that we came from Africa and we were going to wear African garb and stuff like that. But I remember those black students, and I'd say probably it might have been a couple hundred of them just came over and jumped in the middle of the beginning of the parade and led the parade down Meridian Street.
In 1969, there was a protest on campus, a moderate protest about the Vietnam War. Did you participate in that or know of it?
I didn't have time for that. I'm trying to grab, 60. I don't know if it was 69. I remember it might have happened prior to me getting here, okay? What episode I do remember, and I'm thinking I was probably maybe a sophomore. This might have been 71. I'm thinking it might have been 70. I remember a group of students on campus saying that, because they were protesting the Vietnam War, that they were going to show the effects of napalm had on people. They were going to burn a dog right in front of the administration. They were going to set a dog on fire. Well, people went crazy about that. All right. So now, I think this was the growth of Michael Chisley. I knew they weren't going to set no dog on fire. All right. And I'm thinking, like, who really believes that they're going to set a dog on fire? But there was enough people there, and they were writing it up in the Daily News and all this other stuff, like how this group was going to set the dog. And I remember there was a professor who was in the history department. Well, he was a grad assistant, and he'd been in Vietnam, and he said that he wasn't going to allow them to burn no dog, and he was going to fight whoever tried to do it and stuff like that. I was like, well, that I want to see. I want to see this professor fight these students. So when the day came and the hour came where they were going to torch this dog, they didn't do it. And they said the whole thing was to evoke dialogue about what was going on in Vietnam and stuff like that. And so they went someplace and had a big conversation about whether it was right to be in Vietnam, whether it was wrong to be involved, where we should pull out and stuff like that. So that's what I remember, that that specific. Now it's something like a big protest on '69. I don't really remember that.
You mentioned the Daily News earlier. Do you feel like the Daily News pushed a political agenda earlier back then, or they were biased in one area?
I don't think it was. I think what they were doing, they were reporting what's going on. It might have been a little liberal leaning, but I think for the most part they were just writing articles of what were going on campus. Some things was were on a national basis, but I think it was just a matter, here's what's going on in Muncie and on Ball State's campus, and some things that might going on in the country.
Do you believe that they played a significant role in students' lives?
Oh yeah, because first of all, the paper was free. Number two, it was out every day, and so it sort of sort of kept you connected, between your studies, on what was going on.
Okay. And what was your and the campus's reaction to the Kent State shooting?
Oddly enough, it was some, people were concerned, because that was really big at the time. I remember that specifically when it happened, and there were people who were upset. But you got to consider, Muncie is a pretty, Ball State was, at that time, was a pretty conservative campus, and even though Kent State was, we were all in the, the MAC conference and stuff like that, people, you don't protest the government, okay? That was pretty much a given. Okay, even though there were people who did, and there were pockets of students who did, for the most part on campus, Ball State was pretty conservative. So it's like, oh, it was terrible what they did to them, but okay, I gotta get to class. Not that I felt that way, but that was pretty much what was going on.
And how did you feel about that?
Me being African American, I was shocked that I could see. About Southern University in 1969, 1970, Jackson State. They shot students at both of them universities. So you didn't know about that. But you knew about Kent State.
So I'm guessing there was a demographic difference between the students at Kent State and Jackson.
No, the difference was those are white students. And that made national news. They still talk about Kent State shooting. They don't talk about the shooting at Southern University, largest black university in America at the time. They don't talk about the shooting at Jackson State. Black folks, marginalized indifference. So my point being is that although I was shocked that they shot these students at Kent State, they were shooting black students in other places, and they get little blurbs about it. If you see my passion, what was different between the kids at Kent State and the children at Jackson State, Southern University? No difference, still students. But they got killed. Hands up, don't shoot. We're still fighting that battle 40 years later. Okay.
Did you vocalize that?
Oh yeah, I think we all did. In our classes, as far as marching up and down the street vocalizing, no, we didn't do it. But in classes, we expressed our indifference and our feelings toward that, especially if you were in a history class or a political science class or something like that. I had professors that, like to this day, Dr. John Barber, he helped promote, dialogue on stuff like that in his classes. Dr. John, I think his name was Dr. John White in his class, because he taught a class on black history. White professor teaching black history, you know, oxymoron. But what I'm saying is that you had professors in their classes who were trying to get dialogue on things like this. But once you stepped out of the classroom, you know, those are things we might discuss in our circle. But, you know, as far as large, you know, campus-wide, no.
How was your feelings about those incidents received by, you know, white students?
We didn't have that much, you know, unless it was in class. We didn't really have that much contact with one, maybe in the dorms or something like that. But, you know, Jackson, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you didn't know about it, okay? Now, 1969, 70, white students from Indiana knowing about a Jackson State or a Southern University in Baton Rouge. They didn't know those places. They might as well have been in Cambodia because they didn't know nothing about it. So how could it, you know, oh, wow, that's terrible.
Speaking of Cambodia, were you afraid to get drafted during that time?
Yeah.
Was it pretty much like generally like everybody was on the edge about you getting drafted?
Yeah. I remember specifically one day, and when what they used to do, when they were doing the draft, and they would pull you. You had a number when you signed up with Selective Service. You had a number. Well, I think I take it back. You know, it's depending on when you were born. If you were born if they were gonna pull draftees from 1950, who were born in 1951, all 365 days, you know, had a number. Okay, there was a random number, so you knew what your number was. So let's say my number was 260, and they start, you know, pulling numbers. Okay, you know, that meant that this age group, this age or this date they were drafted, and so for some reason I can't really remember all the details, and maybe each day had a number, and so what happened is if they say, okay, we need 30,000 troops, so we're going to go all the way down to numbers 1 to 190. Well, everybody in that group knew they was getting drafted. All right. So I literally saw guys break down, cry and stuff like that. My number was right in the middle. So that meant that, well, we need 30, but we need 40. We're probably going to pull this next group. So for the most part, I knew, okay, I'm safe for now, but I don't know how long. Right after that, they got rid of the draft. So I didn't have to worry about it anymore.
If you were drafted, what would your thoughts have probably been? Just
where do I go show up at? I would have went. Okay, I wouldn't been a happy camper, but I would have went. But see, my brother was in the war, and everybody that got drafted didn't go over to Vietnam. Okay, my brother never left the States. I think farthest he went was New Jersey, because a lot of it had to do with your classification, what they classified you for when you came out of boot camp. And when he came out, he was classified either to go to helicopter training school, officer candidate school, or typist school. And he chose typist school because they told him he flew a helicopter, a rock would knock a helicopter out of the sky. If he went to officer candidate, the troops were shooting their own officers. So he didn't want to, so he went to typist school, never left the country. So that's what I was counting on.
Okay. So were there any professors that made a significant impact on you?
I just mentioned two of them. You know, John Barber, Dr. White. I think Dr. White still has something to do with the School of Architecture. Kathy Zambelli. I had her for an English class here. Dr. Shondale in the physical education department. Yeah, and really what happened is that these people sort of took, you know, I am here by the grace of God, and somebody took me under their wing. Okay, I realized that. Nothing special about me. I'm no smarter than anybody else. Not any more talented than anybody else. Is that some people saw something in me and decided to take me under their wing.
Okay, so starting to transition away from the university and more to life after the university. Did you meet your wife at Ball State?
Yes, my wife for 43 years. I met her. She didn't go to Ball State. She went to Anderson College. I met her at an after party off campus. And I had a cousin. Her and her husband went to Anderson College. And so when I met my wife Denise at the party, got her phone number and stuff like that, called her a couple of times. Me and some friends from here went over, over to Anderson. And Anderson's a Church of God college, so they didn't party on campus. Okay, they couldn't. But they, they had their little places that they hung out at and stuff like that. So me and my wife started communicating back and forth. After probably the second date, I realized this is the woman in my life, and I was going to marry her.
Did you guys have any children?
Yeah, we have two sons.
And what are their names?
Michael Jr. and Andre.
Okay. And what were your plans after graduation? Did you already know what you were about to do?
I knew I was going to, when I graduated, I knew I was going to be a teacher, wanted to coach. Pretty much knew that's what I wanted to do, was teach and coach. Wanted to start out in the high school level, but didn't get high school. I got a middle school. Well, actually at that time, the schools in Indianapolis went from K through 8. So I was in an elementary school. That probably of all the schools and the students that I taught, those are probably those are my favorite students. Middle class, hardworking black families over in the Butler Tarkington area. I've had a assistant mayor that came from that group. It was on one of my football teams. I've had a professional football player that came out of that group. Got a guy now who's a deputy chief for the police department that came out of that group. Those kids who see me, they still call me Coach Chisley. They were just, they were just an exciting group of kids that they knew if they worked hard, studied hard, that they would be successful. And most of them pretty much are to this day. That was 40-some years ago.
So did you continue your education after Ball State, or did you?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I came back to Ball State and was going to work on a counseling degree. But I took some classes here, but as time went by, it was just, with a family there, it's just cost prohibitive, kept me from driving back and forth. We didn't have distance learning back then. So you had to do pretty much everything campus. They had some satellite campuses, but those were like people who lived in South Bend. They didn't have to travel as far. But if you went to, did graduate work, you pretty much did graduate work in your area or where you were at. I got my master's at Butler, because literally from where I lived at, it was right around the corner. And I had, what happened, I had taught for 3 years. And after my third year of teaching, I really started to question, I said, is this what I really want to do for the rest of my life? And at that time, a lot of people went in education, were switching over, going into business. I decided that I wanted to try in my graduate alumni group, as far as my fraternity. A lot of my brothers were, working for GM and other places like that. And I decided I wanted to try the business route. I was young enough, I sort of felt like if I was going to make a move, I needed to make the move then, because I was only like 25 years old. And so I went into, I sold insurance for about 6 years and was pretty successful in the insurance business, but I was, it was something that was missing. And what was missing was my camaraderie I had with my parents and with my students and stuff like that. And I really didn't think I was making the impact on life that I wanted to make, so I went back into education. But what happened that 10 year, I'm not sad that I did that, because what that did is expose me to another level of business as far as business psychology and stuff like that. And I decided I was going to be a counselor. So I'd signed up to take some classes here at Ball State. But Butler, since it was right around my corner, my mother convinced me, you really need to look at Butler. I decided to get my master's at Butler.
And what was that master's degree?
Master in counseling, school counseling.
And so after you went back to education, so there's IPS again?
Mm-hmm. Went back to IPS, got riffed right after that, which is reduction in force. So I didn't have a job, and I ended up out in Perry Township. But while I was out in Perry Township, that's when I was, that's really where I was working on my master's degree at. While I was out in Perry Township for 6 years, another person took me under their wing, named Les Branham. If it wasn't for Les Branham, I would not have did the things that I did in education. He kept pushing me, he said, Mike, you need to be an administrator. Administration was the farthest thing from my mind. I didn't want to be a principal or anything like that. But he kept pushing me. And he told me about a program that called Danforth. It was a 1-year program, and after you completed the year program, you would have a administrative license. I said, well, I can do a year. I can probably do that standing on my head. So I went through the Danforth. I'm technically a Danforth scholar. Did that, got an administrative license. And then I ended up being a assistant principal. I left Perry Township, came back to IPS as an assistant principal.
How did your role change from going from a counselor to a principal?
Actually, I never did get to counsel. I got the degree. Now, what happened while I was out in Perry Township, I was what they call a homeschool advisor. So I counseled out there, but not in the traditional role as a school counselor. It was probably good that I had that experience, because I actually practiced counseling. I worked with counsel children. I counsel parents. I counsel teachers, okay? School counselors really don't get to do that, okay? Because they got them building schedules. They have them working with I-STEP. So they don't get, they're trained to do those things, but they're not technically trained to be a disciplinarian. School counselors aren't trained to build schedules and so like. But a lot of times principals will put them in that role because it's things they don't want to do. And I can say that honestly. So when I left and became a principal, okay, I probably counseled more as a school administrator than I did when I was actually in the role of a counselor, because students have problems. One thing I realized early, in my role as an assistant principal, the same problems that I saw in students were the exact same problems I saw in teachers and other adults. Just because you're a child and you become an adult doesn't mean those problems go away. They probably manifest as we get older. So I quit identifying students' problems as students' problems and recognizing that they were really human problems, okay? And the adults that I would come in contact with, they were the same. They had they had the same issues that the children had, but they were magnified. But because you're an adult, you can't tell me what to do because I'm an adult and I'll do it if I want to. Well, guess what? Children do the same thing. If they don't want to do it, they shut down on you. So your role, my role as an administrator, was to understand what the dynamics were that were going on with this child or his family or this teacher or administrator. Get them to recognize that they were the source of whether they were going to get better or not. And if anything, direct them, put them in a direction where they can get the necessary services they need to improve if they wanted to improve. Okay? So I did more of that as an administrator than I did when I was actually counseling.
Okay. All right, so what is the current state of IPS school systems right now?
They're whistling up a long rope, okay? I'm not going to blame it on anybody because this is stuff, that's one of the problems with our society is that we like to place blame on immediacy. He should have did this, she should have did this. They had done this, then everything would be okay. The demise of the Indianapolis public school system or the troubles that they're having in the Indianapolis public school system is not an Indianapolis public school system problem. It's an urban school problem throughout the country. You take Indianapolis public schools, St. Louis public schools, Miami public schools, Cincinnati public schools, they all got the same problems, okay? But people want to say, oh no, that's not the case. I'm old enough that I remember, like everybody said, well, they can't pass I-STEP. The kids over there, a good percentage of them can't pass I-STEP. And IPS, when you compare IPS's I-STEP scores, they're not as good as the other schools' I-STEP scores. First of all, I'm old enough to remember that when the state of Indiana was going to I-STEP, they said they would never use I-STEP to compare students in schools. What do? We compare students in schools, okay? I've graded test scores throughout the country as they evaluate. You can't compare Indiana scores to Ohio scores, to Florida scores, because first of all, they use different tests. They might use the same criteria that they want to evaluate, but the way they score them are differently. So, give you an example. In I-STEP, you might on a essay type test, you might be able to get, they might give you 4 points on a specific question. But if you don't answer right, you get a 0. In Georgia, the same criteria or format, you get, even if you don't answer right, but you attempt, you get a 1. Now, how do they weight those scores? Georgia weights theirs different than Indiana. Indiana weights theirs different than Ohio. Ohio weights theirs different than California. So how can you take something that's supposed to be objective and give subjective meaning to it? You can't do it. So all this stuff that, people read in the newspaper and stuff like that, Indiana, IPS is not doing this stuff like that, it's all a bunch of stuff, okay? Now, do we want children to succeed and be successful? Yes, we do. Do the children IPS need, but then you got to start looking at the dynamics of those students and where they're coming from. There's been a lot of information and data on brain research. one of the things they know about brain research is that children that are raised in chaotic, dramatized situations, it stunts the growth of neurons building in their brain. So we have found out that most black males at the 4th grade level start dropping out of school. They don't just say, well, I'm quitting school. Mentally, they're dropping out of school. A lot of them have been traumatized, okay? So if the brain literally just shuts down when you get caught, when you're in a traumatized situation. You don't produce the chemicals you need to think clearly and stuff like that. Now, if you know that a large segment of your population through the country has to deal with that, you're going to give them a test, and then you're going to tell them that your school's not productive because you live in a traumatized area. It's a lot deeper than that, okay? But we bought into that. I think if you talk to any educator here at the university level, they will probably tell you those things, okay? But do they advocate for those students? And I'm not saying just because they're black students and they live in the ghetto. Students who live in rural communities have the same problems, but they don't talk about it. Students who live in rural communities, allow their test scores are just as low as urban test scores, okay? So my point I'm trying to make with all this is that, yes, we want to uplift our students. We want to make sure that they go into the 21st century as capable learners and they can go out and they can compete with the rest of the world, okay? But when you start talking about the world and stuff like that, a lot of countries in the world, like I'll give you a good example, Germany. Germany's just now starting to try to adapt, trying to educate all their children. But prior to that, prior to this, in Germany, after you get to a certain level, you test whether you're going to go into college, academics, or you're going to go into skilled labor. I had some German professors at the school I was principal at, had some German professors that came, actually they came, Ball State had brought them over here from Germany, and they wanted to examine our democratic ways that we, educate everybody. Because everybody in Germany didn't get it, and this is less than 10 years ago when this happened. They were trying to say, well, okay, we need to educate all our children equally. But they weren't doing that. So Ball State brought them, they came, and the guy I was working with Ball State in this program called Gear Up, they brought him to my school because we had made some dramatic changes with the students in the school. They were enthralled, they just couldn't believe the changes that we did with these kids, and they wanted to understand how they could copy this and bring it back to Germany. 300,000 people 300 million people in India and Russia have college degrees. But both those countries have 1 million people. What happened to the other 700 million people? You're comparing apples with oranges. But there's a fear factor. If we want to get something, promote something, we have to scare the masses and make them believe that we're falling behind Japan and India and they're going to take over the country. But they got billion people in it. How is 300? They got as many college educated people in their country as we have people in our country. The numbers don't work.
Recently, there's been a rise in tensions between police and largely the African American community and other communities as well. What are your thoughts on that?
They've always been there. This is nothing new. As I said earlier, I'm a son of a police officer. All right? A proud son of a police officer. I came up during the Black Panther movement civil rights movement, where policemen were beating up students, and I'm not students, but black people in the street. They've always done that. This is nothing new. It's just because of our media that it's more visible, but it's always happened. I remember my father, I'm 63 years old, and I remember the day that my father gave me the keys to the car, him telling me what to do if I was stopped by the police. This is a police officer telling his son what to do. Is this something that came up just in my generation? No. I'm sure his dad probably had the same conversation with him when he was 15, 16 years old. Okay? Nothing has really changed. It's just more visibility. So when people say, oh, this is horrible what they did in Ferguson and what they, all these black, what they choked. Some stuff, if you don't want it to be a problem, it won't be a problem. Okay? But at some point, I used to have a friend that used to say, if you mess with a sheep long enough, it'll bite you. Most docile animal that I think anybody could think of was a sheep. But if you mess with it long enough, it's going to bite you. Okay? When people feel like they're being marginalized and not listened to, yeah, they're going to raise up. And if your only way of combating that is that we're going to shoot them, we're going to imprison them, then at some point, what makes you any different than a communist country or a third world country?
What do you think can be done to fix the problems that are presented?
I gotta tell you a story. That's what I do. When I used to hire teachers, young teachers would come to me and they say, when they'd interview, and they say, and I'd ask them, so, okay, I told you all about Coleman or wherever I was at. Do you have any questions? And they would say, well, Mr. Chisley, if I get in trouble, will you support me? No. I'm not going to out you out in front of everybody, but if you did something that you weren't supposed to do, I'm not going to support you. When we get behind closed doors, I'm going to tell you what you did wrong, what you should have did, and how we're going to correct this. But no, I'm not going to say, oh, he or she was right. Okay? No, I'm not doing that. Because that means I don't have integrity. For these chiefs of police around these countries have had all these problems to say, oh, we're going to support our police officers right now. They have no integrity. How can you support something that's wrong? You can't if you have integrity. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that, these are people that they have to work with every day. Okay? But if somebody does something wrong, then we're going to take care of that internally, and you take care of it internally, okay? And people know what you've done, because you can't hide anything anymore. With cell phones and everything, you can't, in iPads, you can't hide anything anymore. People, that fraternity down in Oklahoma, you can't hide anything anymore, okay? So the point being is that, first of all, you can't support wrongdoings, okay? You have to have open dialogue. You have to admit that there's a problem, and we're looking for help to resolve these problems, okay? But you just don't say, oh, we don't have a problem, like the mayor in Ferguson did. Oh, we don't have any racial problems. Oh, no, we just shoot everybody. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I'd hate to say I got shot over stealing some cigars. No matter what your belief is.
All right, sir, before we conclude this interview, is there anything you want the people to know about your life, career, or experiences at Ball State?
First of all, I'd like to say I'm happy that I was chosen for this project. Anytime over the years, I found that it's an honor for me to give back to the university. I wouldn't have accomplished a lot of what I've done if it wasn't for Ball State University and the people that were surrounded. with me around the university. So I'm very grateful to the university. Will always be grateful. I was listening to a program the other day, and they said if you could look back to a young person starting out, that's your same person 40 years ago or 20 years ago, what would you tell them about the future? So if I was looking back now, talking to Mike Chisley, that was 22 years old, well, I was 21 when I graduated from here, and tell him anything about the future, I would say to Mike that your future is very promising. You are limited only by the depths of where your mind reaches. Pick the people you associate very carefully with and enjoy the journey. So I would say that any student that looks at this in the future, enjoy the journey.
All right, sir. Well, on behalf of the Ball State University African American Alumni Oral History Project, I want to thank you for joining us. And
Thank you.